Shotgun to shotgun.
Doc
Shotgun.
folks in the building. Shout out to Baba Tashango, who just put it down talking about George Jackson and brotherhood. Let me get to sharing my screen so we can start. That would be it. Oh, actually, let me do it this way. All right. Can y'all see the screen? Let me get a yay bo. I can't see the chat from here, so go ahead and shout it out. All right, thank you, bro. Thank you. All right, cool. So let's get into it. I wanted to begin by thanking y'all for joining us. Thank you for having me as a part of this conference. And I've already seen, enough to make me full. So I'm just trying to make my contribution as well. Today, the topic is the wage of change is Black death. That's a question mark. Maroonage and African possibility. So this came from a talk that I gave recently, and I was, Brother Elias had asked me to present for the conference, and I wanted to expand on that talk because I felt like that audience, this was about where I could take them. And I know that, if we're here at the 100 Years in the Whirlwind Conference, we're ready to take it past that. So the wage of change is Black death, maroonage, and African possibility. I begin with a quote from the great Kwame Ture, who says that in everything that Africans got in this country, just reform, which everybody else gets, we have to shed our blood. And this was the quote that sort of inspired that idea of the wage of change is Black death. The very premise of that, I think, is the premise that a lot of the protests as of late have shared, that the idea of Black Lives Matter shares, and that is that there is only one possibility afforded to us, and that is either integration or annihilation. And many of us know that integration is annihilation in a lot of ways. So when Baba Kwame Ture says, and everything that Africans got in this country, right, we have to shed our blood. The wage of change is Black death. For a lot of what we've been seeing, again, as of late, it seems like the conversation stops there. We are complaining to the oppressor that they keep killing us, as opposed to not only imagining other possibilities, but looking within our own traditions to get down to the reality that we do have other possibilities available to us. And for me and for us, that's maroonage. But before I get there, I want to start on the west coast of Africa. The natural beginning is in Africa. So I want to take you to the west coast, the original West Side, and tell you about a man named Nana Comer. So in the oral tradition of this people, who are an Akan people, Fanti in particular, they cite their origins as being somewhere around the Sudan. And in this particular time period, they were basically fleeing persecution and Arab enslavement. So they migrated from Sudan and eastern part of Africa across to the western coast. And the way that they would do it is they would send out scouts who would basically look for land and start, this is a temporary place for us to rest, let's move, and so on and so forth, until they could find a permanent home. Well, one day, a hunter by the name of Nana Comer, and again, Baba Tashango was just putting it down that, even in the Yoruba tradition, the idea of Ogun as the warrior and his right-hand man, his friend, his partner in crime was Oshosi, right, the hunter. So it's the idea that the hunter and the warrior are of kin. So here we go. Nana Comer is out here, and he's looking for a place to obviously bring his people to settle, and he comes across an elephant. The elephant is by itself. Now, elephants are social animals. They don't normally roll by themselves, but he's like, yo, whatever. He's looking around. He doesn't see anything wrong, so he pursues this elephant, and he's thinking to himself, yo, if I kill this elephant, we about to eat, right? So he goes after the elephant. The elephant's dipping and diving, right? And the elephant runs up a hill. So Nana Comer chases him, and when he gets to the top of the hill, he sees that the elephant has paused and is basically just sitting up there. I guess maybe he's catching his breath, or he thought that he had lost the threat, and he's just chilling. And Nana Comer comes up behind and he slays him. Boom, the elephant falls. Before Nana Comer can rejoice in his victory, he turns around and is met with one of the most beautiful sights that his eyes had ever seen, and he was seeing the ocean. And he thought to himself, wow, this is a perfect place for my people to settle here up on this hill overlooking the ocean. Now remember, this is before the arrival of the Europeans, so the ocean wasn't a threat as of yet, right? I want to ask y'all, and shout it out. I can't see the chat. I want to hear your voices. I want to ask you, please shout out, why would this location from a military standpoint be good for Nana Comer's people to settle?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
All right, so I'm asking why from a military perspective would Nana Comer feel that this was an ideal place for his people to settle?
No takers?
All right, well.
They could see from multiple directions.
Exactly, right. So exactly, that's it. Up on top of this hill, they could see three sides, and they have the natural barrier of the sea behind them, as well as obviously them being familiar with it, they would have escape routes and way to get off the hill and so forth. But this gave them a tactical advantage. Remember, these are people who are fleeing persecution, death, and enslavement. So they're constantly have that military mindset of self-defense. So Nana Comer is up here, and he's saying to himself that this is the best place for us to be. So he sends word back to his village, his chief, and he says, listen, y'all, I got it. Come, let's go. And the chief sends back, said, all right, good. We're going to send somebody out to check it out. And he sends word back to the chief, like, I am the somebody. I've checked it out. I'm telling y'all, I've done my job. Come through. Let's go. And the chief hits him back like, listen, I told you we're coming. All right. I'm sorry. And so he Nana Comer one more time says to him, I'm gonna tell y'all like this. I'm here. This is the place. Please come through. I'll be here when you're ready. And they listen. I mean, they don't listen. They sort of take their time. And in the talk amongst the elders in the villages, that they say, let me pull this up, Comer Ansi. Comer Ansi, right? Which means Comer doesn't listen. Again, I want to call on y'all, shout out, what are some of the attributes, some of the synonyms that we would use when we're talking about someone who doesn't listen? This is going to play an important role in where I'm about to take y'all. So where y'all at? What are some of the synonyms that we use to describe people who don't listen?
Hard-headed.
What else?
Thick-skulled.
Yeah, what else?
Stubborn.
Stubborn. Anybody else? We also got things like insubordinate, which was one they used to say to me in school. And I was insubordinate, you know, we said hard-headed, stubborn, but we're also talking about, I mean, he could really take it to things like rebellious, right? And the idea now is that Comer Ansi, Comer is, of course, like I said, he's a hunter, he's a warrior. He is vigilantly committed to the well-being of his people. And when they finally respond to his call and they make their way out to this land that he has found atop a hill that is surrounded by surrounded on three sides by land as far as the eye can see and ocean behind them, they're all enthralled. They are sharing his enthusiasm for that that piece of land. And the chief decides to name he doesn't name the village after Nana Comer, he names it after his attributes. Kormansi, right? Nana Comer doesn't listen. So I got this story from the chief of Kormansi back in 2004 when I was living in Ghana. I was studying for 3.5 months, and the program was structured in a way where for 2.5 months, we traveled throughout the entire country. We went to Benin, we went all the way to the north, walked over into Burkina Faso. And that last month was a time for independent study. I chose to do my independent study on the village of Kormansi because it is almost unrecognizable from any other village that is on the coast. So if you look here, this is in Ghana. You can't, if you can look closely right here, it says Coromantine, and I'll get to why it's called that in a second, right? But that's Coromantine right there. Right here is Cape Coast, Elmina, and then here is Accra. So we're talking about 25 minutes outside of Cape Coast on the Accra Cape Coast Road. It's right there on the sea. And like I said, there's virtually nothing to set it apart from any other thing that is, or any other village that's on the coast except this, right? This one thing. So I said that when Nana Comer found this village, this piece of land to found the village, the ocean wasn't a threat. Of course, past several hundred years, it would become a threat. So this is Fort Amsterdam. It was built, it was originally called Fort Coromantine after the name of the village. It was built in the 1630s by the British, late 1630s. It was the first armored fort that the British built on the coast of West Africa. So remember now at this point, so Elmina existed. Cape Coast would have been built about 15 years later. Elmina was constructed, but that was built by the Portuguese and later taken over by the Dutch. And then even here in the name, you see Fort Amsterdam, that there was a tussle over things. So in response to the British taking New Amsterdam, which was New York, the Dutch eventually took this over and turned it from Fort Coromantine to Fort Amsterdam. And this is where, again, the first Africans that British people were taking from Cape Coast were coming through here. Now, this obviously, this is a fort, right? It's not a dungeon, a castle. Now, they did have a small area. But what eventually was significant about this was that Coromantine would go on to have a name that rang with infamy around the world. So here are some of the different spellings you'll find in the archives. You can have Coromantine, Coromantine, right, with the C. And like we saw, Coromantine was on that map that I just showed you, which was a British colonial map. All right, so again, I want to ask y'all, has anyone seen any of these names in any of their forms before?
Yes.
Where have you seen it?
Jamaica.
And in what context?
Maroons.
Exactly. So these names have gone. In fact, are any of y'all familiar with Sundial products, Sundial bitters? They have a Coromantine bitter, which is supposed to make you, it's about virility and strength and all of that sort of thing. But this, yes, in Jamaica, amongst the Jamaican Maroons, there is a language. It's a ritual language called Coromantine. It's a dance, right? It has to do with us, it's an element of spirit possession, so on and so forth. But this idea, I said that this name rang with infamy around the world. Now, infamy to whom? Obviously to the Europeans, because this was the people who were involved with rebellion and Maroonage. In other words, if you look through the archives, what you're going to see is that all throughout the British Caribbean, the British settled the British colonies in the Caribbean, you're going to see that the Coromantine, however it's spelled, are associated with virtually every major rebellion and Maroon Foundation. This is particularly in the British society, because the French wouldn't mess with them. The Dutch eventually stopped dealing with them. The Portuguese had nothing to do with them, which is partially why you don't see very many Akan in places like Brazil. So I've listed out just a few of these, right? So you've got Cujo, who is the great Maroon leader in Jamaica, Tacky's Rebellion, also in Jamaica, the St. John Insurrection, right, in the Danish West Indies. So Baba Tashango and I had the honor of being able to travel with our families to the island of St. John, where Africans took it over for a period of 9 months or so. And that was heavy involvement in with the Coromantine people, the Bussa Rebellion of Barbados, Kwame, so on and so forth, right? You've got two Kofis, one in present day Guyana and another one in New York, Kwaku, Kwamina, Kwaku Tachi. The idea here is that all of these people were known as Coromantine. Now, we know that this is somewhat of a generalization. It really doesn't make sense to for the people of Fort Amsterdam to enslave those in the immediate surrounding areas. That's not sustainable. I mean, how many people could there be in the village for you to sustain? Well, this name was one that would later be applied to any African who was taken from the Gold Coast. They were given this name, Cormansi. And again, consistently, we see that there is a common characteristic, right? And the idea that I said that the British loved them. The British loved them because they said that they are stubborn and hard-headed. Remember, Comer Ansi, they are stubborn, they are hard-headed, they are rebellious. However, if you could break them, they are the best workers you can have. Obviously, they were very difficult to quote unquote break, which is why, like I said, the French, the Portuguese wouldn't mess with them. So again, we go back to this idea. Now, what's in the name? The name of this village was named after a man who was not only stubborn and hard-headed, right, but was committed to the freedom and liberation of his people. And that is a legacy that was carried on throughout the entire world. Till this day, again, when we talk about instances like the Jamaican Maroons, the idea is that these are still people who technically are independent of any national government. The Maroons of Jamaica are technically independent of the Jamaican government. Now, how that plays itself out practically or culturally is another question altogether. But the idea is that that Coromantee spirit has continued throughout this period of time. So what I want to do is, before I move on to the so-called New World, the wicked wilderness of the Americas, is that I want to say that this idea of maroonage is indeed an African tradition. So much of how we talk about, or how maroonage and maroon societies are spoken of, is that they are addressed in a way where it is something that is endemic or indigenous to the New World, right? So I'm thinking particularly of one of the largest names that you will come across, for worse, not for better, is that of Richard Price, who is a white anthropologist out of, he might still be at Johns Hopkins. I think he's retired now, but he was one of the, not first scholars, because there was, what's his name? Melville Herskovitz, who was actually Zora Neale Hurston's teacher. He was the one who sent her around Harlem measuring Black people's skulls, right, to determine intelligence. Actually, let me go down that road for a second, because when we talk about the evolution of Maroon scholarship, Melville Herskovitz and his wife had traveled to Suriname, which also had, was at that time was known as Dutch Guyana, which had a very large population of Coromantee people, right? Till this day. In fact, when you look at the Maroons of Suriname, these are people who ran so far into the bush. I wish I could show you a map, right? But if you know, Suriname is right next to Guyana on the top of South America. This is French Guyana, somewhere in there, but it's on the top of South America, not far from Trinidad, right? The Maroons of Suriname, the Juka, the name is slipping me right now, but the Salamanca ran so far into the bush that they border the northern tip of Brazil. So they went so far away from the coastal plantation, and they were able to preserve their traditions. If you look up Juka Maroons on YouTube, there's a video from the 1930s where a news crew goes in, and basically it looks as what traditional pictures of Africa will be, in terms of architecture, in terms of dress, in terms of customs and things like that. And this is in the 1930s, that they were so isolated that they were able to maintain some sort of tradition. In fact, there's a book by two brothers from Harvard, brothers though, called "I Sought My Brother," where they actually took a trip down to Suriname to meet with this group of people. So let me bring it back to Melville Herskovitz, and then I'll take it back to Richard Price, and then I'll get us back on the road to liberation. But for now, Melville Herskovitz, in his research in Suriname, came up with this idea of a scale of Africanity, where he ranks how African are people in the New World. Can anybody guess who was first on that list?
Brazil.
Not Brazil. They were actually third on that list.
Haiti.
Exactly. So he says that Haiti is the most African. Then he goes to Jamaica. Then he goes to Brazil, and then all the way down he comes to those in the United States as the least African. Now this is like a 180 for him, because when his first introduction to Black people around the time of the Harlem Renaissance was I don't know if y'all have read that book, The New Negro, by Alain Locke. He has an essay in there where he says the Negro is just is an American with darker skin. So he is just like anybody else, just he has darker skin. Now he's getting into this ranking of Africanity. So he's dealing with that. The next sort of major European scholar to go would be this guy, Richard Price, who has dedicated his life to studying Black people and Maroonage and so forth. And he's done so in a way that it has issues, but we don't need to talk about that. What I do want to talk about is the idea, though, is that Richard Price's main argument is that African people, and this comes from an article that he wrote with another anthropologist, Sidney Mintz, where he says that African people in the New World are a new people altogether. The process of enslavement and transportation, what we call the Ma'afa, was one of erasure, and they were blank slates when they got to the shores of the Americas, to be written on by primarily what he says, European and indigenous cultures. That there was very little of African culture to remain except naming practices and systems of justice, is what he says. Completely, well, whatever. The idea here is that he's wrong. He's dead wrong. And part of it is the larger argument here is that these concepts of Maroonage and rebellion, which are in many ways two sides of the same coin, find their origins on the continent of Africa. So let's get back to the most important stuff, which is us. This right here is a picture of Hey Amador. He led a Quilombo, which is a free nation established on the island of São Tomé in the late 16th century. So remember, São Tomé is the place, it's off the coast of West Africa, where the Portuguese grabbed people from Angola, brought them there to cultivate sugarcane. And when they realized it was successful, that's when they went to Brazil and started bringing people to Brazil. So it was the Portuguese who would bring, like, let's say the Bahia, right? Salvador da Bahia, which today has over 80% Black people, which is considered the epicenter of Afro-Brazilian culture, has, they say that 1/4 of all Africans taken to the New World passed through the port of Bahia, right? So this was set in place by the experiment that happened in São Tomé. So even from the very beginning, Hey Amador is leading a rebellion. Now, he was sold out after a year, even though they established what they were calling a nation, flew a flag and all of that. They established a nation. He was killed a year later, but he's still remembered to this day as a hero on the small island of São Tomé and Príncipe, which is, a neighboring island. But the reason that this is important to me in this conversation is that this is an African tradition of pursuing community autonomy. I'll get into definitions in a second. But we also see examples of this throughout the Congo-Angola region, throughout Eastern Africa as well. African people seeking, similar to Nana Comer, seeking a place where they can build community and sustain themselves and their generations to come. So, Maroonage, the practice and process by which African people create and maintain autonomous communities. So this is from my dissertation a few years ago. And I've boiled it down because I'm going to give you some examples in a second. But when we boil it down to what is the kernel, as I see it, of Maroonage, it is the practice. It is the practice and process by which African people create and maintain autonomous communities. So in today's discussion, I want to talk with y'all about possibilities of Maroonage that are not tied to chattel enslavement as it's been presented to us by people like, excuse me, by people like Richard Price in much of the Maroon scholarship, all right? Now, another definition that I really like comes from Carolyn Cooper, her 1993 book, Noise in the Blood. That tradition of resistance science that establishes an alternative psychic space, both within and beyond the boundaries of the enslaving plantation. I need to hear from y'all. How do these definitions strike you? What do they hit on that you agree with? Do they exclude things that you think should be added? From your understanding of Maroonage, how do these definitions shape up? And if you're just hearing about Maroonage for the first time, tell us your thoughts. Don't be shy now. We all friends now. Brother Hassan, you in there working with the youth, man. How does this hit you?
It has truth in it, but it more so speaks to the fact that um, a lot of us are operating or marooning from our own places, or that we could be.
Tell me more, bro.
So, just basically speaking to the fact that, not all of us are in the same areas of people activity. So we all could be operating. We all could be a part of this process from our own places.
This is good. This is good. This is good. So, all right, because I want to get into that deeper, and I think that's ultimately the direction we're moving to. So, some of the definitions that we come across, right? Again, this is largely coming from Richard Price, who, like I said, is in many ways seen as, unfortunately, right, at least in terms of a European academic standpoint, an authority. Grand Maroonage. Maroonage is the French pronunciation of it. I don't really have a commitment to that, just like I really don't have a commitment to the term maroonage. So the concept of maroon, there are two generally understood explanations for what this origin of this word maroon is. And most people would identify it as coming from the Spanish word cimarron, which means like wild animal. So when cattle runs away, they say cimarron, right? And that would be what they were using, because in this sense, I mean, think about it, right? Africans were seen as cattle. So an escaping African would be seen similar to the way that a cattle would be, right? So that's one generally accepted word. However, another definition is that maroon comes from an Arawak word, Arawak being the indigenous people found in many of the Caribbean islands, as being the arrow of freedom, arrow of freedom. So the idea now is that it's kind of been subsumed into these different anglicized words, maroonage or maroonage in the French. I don't speak French, but one of the terms that I do think is actually accurate in describing it is what I mentioned earlier, and that's quilombo. So quilombo in the sense of hey amador in São Tomé is that quilombo actually is a Kikongo word that means an armed encampment. Armed encampment, as in this is a military base, is basically what they're saying. And we'll see a lot of, again, so the Portuguese didn't mess with the Coromantee as much. They really spent a lot of time in that Congo Angola region. So they had a lot of people that, Kimbundu, Kikongo, all those sort of languages. And we're going to see this word quilombo a lot in places like Brazil. So here we go, is that they say that grand maroonage is usually what we think of, large-scale flight and the establishment of permanent or semi-permanent communities. When we usually think about maroon societies or maroon formations, we're talking about grand maroonage. So this would be people like Nanny, right? Queen Nanny of the Maroons in Jamaica, or we talked about Cujo earlier, also in Jamaica. Places like, when I was mentioning those in Suriname, who again, till this day are independent of these national governments. Places like Brazil, where we had probably the largest example of maroonage short of the island or the nation of Haiti. And that would be Quilombo dos Palmares. Palmares, which was home to people like Zumbi dos Palmares or Nganga Zumba or Acochereni or Dandara, which had over 10,000 people, lasted for more than 100 years fighting off the British and the Dutch armies. Yo, 10,000, I mean, because you got to think about the global population. Like 10,000 is like a small town nowadays, but at a time like that, there were 10,000 people in the mountains of what is now the state of Pernambuco in the northeast of Brazil, who were, it was a federated state is basically, or a federation of states is what they called it. So you had basically different, local governments and governing structures and things like that. When we talk about grand maroonage, that's what we're generally referring to. And it really comes to mind most often. Now, there's another one called petit maroonage, which is more like temporary escape. So Richard Price, in his condescending nature, would say, he called it truancy, right? Truancy. Truancy is what we say to kids who cut school, right? It's a very paternalistic, demeaning. But this to me, outside of his definition, what always comes to my mind first is the movie Sankofa, right, by Haile Gerima, where you've got that scene where the people with the red scarf, so Mutabaruka was one of them. He was, what was his name, Shango in the movie, right? Mutabaruka, even the main character herself ultimately made it up there, but those who had the red scarf, and they could be overseers, they could be field workers, house workers, but it was the red scarf that signified they were part of a secret society, and they would retreat up to the hills at night to meet with, in the movie they call them the hill people, but those are those folks, and they're up there and they get together and they have ceremonies up there. They have you know, they'll meet and they'll say, since the last time we met, such and such amount of people were born, you know, 6 boys, 7 girls, we have this many pickaxes, this many guns, right? But that was the idea. So petit marronage is not just a sort of, I need to take a vacation, but it is in a way that you can dip from the plantation, right? In all of its you know, manifestations, that you could dip from the plantation in order to establish a foundation that later on would lead to something larger. So there's a book by Sylvain Joffre, and I got a page with some of the books that I recommend on these subjects. Sylvain Joffre, called Slavery's Exiles. It came out in 2014. It's a pretty important study because it largely the conversation on Maroons and Maroonage has been outside of this country. In fact, there was an early essay by Herbert Apathacker who talks about Maroonage in the States, but outside of that, they don't really talk about it too much. And what Sylvain Joffre does in this book is she goes in very deep detail about how, you know, Maroons were here in this country, you know, doing things like how they would construct their settlements so that they would dig tunnels so that the smoke from their cooking would go out miles away, right? And they couldn't be detected. And she comes up with these 2 ideas of the Hinterland Maroons. Again, that's those who retreated to rural or inaccessible locales. When I hear that, I think about if any of y'all have been to the Blue Mountains in Jamaica, right? Those places are inhospitable to life, to say the least, right? You can't really, it doesn't seem like you can grow anything. They're very steep. You know, it's very thick bush, and that's today. So just imagine when those Africans got to the shores of Jamaica and ran away, not knowing where they were, and headed straight to those hills. But those would be the type of Hinterland Maroons. And I'm thinking about what Brother Hassan said earlier, because there's also the borderland Maroons. There are those who settled along the outskirts of the plantations. So this could be, and she goes into detail saying that this could be, you know, a husband and wife. Maybe the husband is still on the plantation, the wife is a Maroon, but she's settled somewhere around the outside, so they could still maintain relations with their family and so forth. They also had trading relationships where they would exchange, where somebody on the plantation would steal from the plantation and give to the Maroons, or the Maroons themselves would go and steal from the plantation, right? It's a lot more complex than simply Africans who ran away, right? That when we really get into the details of it, we see the extent of African genius and ingenuity in terms of the pursuit of freedom. So when, can I get back? Yeah. So when Carolyn Cooper says the tradition of resistance science, right? By this point, it's not like we're just closing our eyes and hoping for the best. Like, yo, we've got this down to a science. It's a tradition of resistance science that establishes an alternative psychic space, both within and beyond the boundaries of the enslaving plantation. Now, we can talk about one of the things that I often push back against is the idea that we try to make ourselves feel better by saying that, you know, it's all in our mind. If we can just detach psychologically, then we're on our way to freedom. And I mean, that's obviously the first step, right? Is to get your mind right. But I think a lot of times we use that as an excuse to not have to do the things that are necessary to get what we must. So I want to talk about a few more things before we really open it up and get into a discussion about these things and where we can take it. But this is the concept of a radical tradition. So Cedric Robinson identifies the Black radical tradition as including maroonage, disengagement, and flight. This book, and I'll share it with you in a second, is Black Marxism, which is so unfortunately titled because it's not about that at all. In fact, he spends about a third of the book tracing back the genealogy of Marxism to basically, you know, white terror domination and how it can never effectively serve the purposes of African people. But it's that second part of the book where he really goes in to the African diaspora, revolt on the African continent, and traces a genealogy of of this tradition. I don't like to say resistance in and of itself, because that's in a lot of ways reactionary, but we're talking about moving towards sovereignty. And for him, that path includes maroonage, disengagement, and flight. And I really, again, this was a very influential book for me, but one of the things that I've added on to that is that actually maroonage includes disengagement and flight, but you can't leave it there. There has to be some level of re-engagement. So when we're talking about, people as runaways, well, those aren't maroons, those are fugitives. The process of maroonage includes a disengagement, pulling away, moving away, and then moving towards and into something else, right? So I know that there is a lot of rhetorical use of this concept of maroonage, intellectual maroonage, or whatever other ways that. But I have committed several years of my life to studying maroonage, because I really feel that it can serve us as a path towards our ultimate liberation. Now, let's be clear. Maroonage is about autonomy. It's not about sovereignty. This is a means towards an end. Once we can establish a place for ourselves where we can be autonomous, we can eventually take it to the next level, and use that space to plot and plan, and then move on to something, the establishment of something that is more permanent, if there is such a thing. But also, I think it's very important that we realize that maroonage is not inherently tied to chattel enslavement, as they try and tell us, right? That once slavery went away, the need for maroonage went away with it. And that's clearly not the case. One, because slavery never went away. But two, because this is a tradition that was never so much about enslavement as it was the pursuit of freedom, right? So the analogy that I always use, I hope it's effective, is that if I'm in a room, and the only thing with depleting oxygen levels, the air is running out in the room, and the only thing standing between me and the air is that door. Well, I'm gonna knock the door down, but it has nothing to do with the door itself. It has everything to do with what's beyond that. And I think that's I'm always mindful not to position ourselves and our liberation pursuits as trying to best, be better than somebody else, or because we are better. That's not even a question. But to sort of conquer. Have our enemy be the focus of our pursuits. It's never about them. They don't even deserve our mental space, right? That we're pursuing something much larger than them, and are willing to do what we must in order to get there. And that includes stomping on them, which, I think, as Baba Cambone says, that there's only one possible solution. Then that's what it's going to have to be. But maroonage for me is one way for us to do it with our current condition, right? So I wanted to open it up and ask y'all, when we talk about this concept, right, of the wage of change being Black death. Well, again, as I started, there is that is if you see the problem as mainstream society, in this case, the United States, as not accepting us. What is the problem? The problem is that they don't accept us. The problem is that police kill us. The problem is that those aren't the problems. If that is the problem, then this is a question that you would say yes, right? That the wage of change is Black death. I'm saying that's not the problem. That's not the real. The real issue is that we don't have the power, or we have not cultivated the power to stop the police from killing us. The real problem is that we do not have spaces that we control, right? Those are the real issues, and as long as we continue to subject ourselves to the existing order, in terms of the order of ideas, the order of possibilities, then it's going to continue to be the case. But for us, I think that our willingness to rebel is the wage of change. And again, rebel not in the sense of, we just want to get one over on the white man, but rebel in the sense of working actively towards the liberation. And in the process, we stomp the hell out of them, yes. But again, that to me really seems to be where our focus should be. Our willingness to rebel is the wage of change. Our willingness to forego our comfort, forego our ease, the cushiness of our jobs, or whatever it is, in order to pursue something greater than that. I want to talk with y'all about what do you see as some of the possibilities of maroonage, or is this all a bunch of poppycock? Not all at once, please. Where y'all at?
Can you repeat the question?
What is the possibility, or how do you see Maroonage as a possibility for us transforming our situation, achieving our ultimate objectives, or is that an impossibility? Are we stuck in this muck, mire, and madness that is, global white terror domination?
I think it's definitely possible, Dr. C. Amari Johnson, because we as African people have everything that we need to do what we must do now. The question is, we are on a train going, like, speeding the other way from, the goal that you're speaking of. So we have to stop that train, hopefully derail that joint, and join, the train that's going towards our way. And I think it could be possible.
I do appreciate that, man. That's my brother in Malcolm, the good Baba Doctor, Brother Samori Kamara. And a lot of my thinking on Maroonage has come out of the work that he's been doing with Kamali Academy, which is an African-centered educational institution, right? And I think that for me was working with Kamali in New Orleans, and then now, Kamali is global. But the idea is that there is a possibility. So the landscape of Kamali's emergence was post-Katrina New Orleans, or post-Hurricane America, as he would call it, right? But post-Katrina New Orleans, where the charter schools had taken over altogether. There were no educational alternatives. It was only charter or private school, all of which were excluding African people. So the emergence of a homeschool collective, and now in New Orleans, there are several homeschool collectives, which to me, and I don't like to use Maroonage metaphorically or even as an analogy, but I'll do it for the purposes of this. You had the emergence of these different collectives in this small city of New Orleans. That to me becomes an opportunity to build these autonomous spaces, these autonomous communities from which to be able to do other things. And I'll talk more about that, but somebody else has something to say?
No, I just wanted to say that I like what you're talking about. In fact, I empathize what you're saying. I've been, researching, reading about Maroons the last 4 or 5 years. My idea of Maroonage is, I like to call independent territory.
All right, what's up?
We control everything. We run everything. Now, the question for me to you is, in a modern context, what does that look like practically? Provide me a landmass, a location. What does it look like for us as a people when we describe? We have to make Maroonage seem practical to the average person. Intellectually, it sounds great, but from a practical standpoint, that's been my conversation. Okay, how can we build liberated territories? Yes, independent schools is in a step in the right direction, but we're talking about economy, we're talking about politics, we're talking about military, we're talking about farming. Where is this? What does it look like? And can you describe it where I can practically taste it, if necessary? I want you in your own words to describe that for everyone.
Man, this is wonderful. So that leads me to this. Thank you so much, brother. What's your name? Brother.
My name is Morris.
Morris, thank you very much. So that is the nature of the conversation, right? I don't necessarily, well, let me say it like this. So Nana Comer led his people to their legacy. And this is very much in line with what you're asking. What do we have to do to establish the legacy for our progeny? So I think that I do think, again, that the independent schools, right, is one example. And I also want to, because I want us to talk a little bit more about that shift from autonomy to sovereignty, because it really seems like what you're talking about is sovereignty. And I'm saying that, that Maroonage could be that link. Nobody wants to stay a Maroon forever. Eventually, right? Exactly. We could take as an example, the island of the nation of Haiti, right? Where it was Maroons who were doing their Maroon thing, and eventually were like, this isn't enough, and pushed through to sovereignty. But I also think, one, that can't happen here in this country. I don't see it as happening here. I think that even the idea of economy would require us to reprioritize our values or reprioritize our desires in terms of I don't think that a global economy as we know it could ever effectively serve us. Now, what does that mean? I think, you know, the island of Cuba is one that's always fascinated me, because here's a tropical island that pretty much has enough natural resources to sustain itself, but to compete with this modern life, they had to make alliances with, you know, the Soviet Union. They had, and when that fell, basically they were left out where, you know, where they are now. My question is that, is it possible for, or was it once upon a time possible for Cuba to build for itself a model of existence that wasn't dependent upon a global economic order? What do you think about that, Brother Morris?
Well, you asked an excellent question, and I guess I don't want to disclose too much information, but I've had that Cuban experience. So I know what that looks like, real life.
Yeah.
But you know, Cuba, it's too small, and like you said, there's too many forces that you know, Cuba is an excellent model to look at, but it cannot sustain itself, you know, by itself. It's done exceptionally because of the will and the determination of the people. Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
But you know, when I look at you reference all the movies that I've watched and studied. Sankofa, you know, Quilombo, all these communities. But the thing is, you know, the enemy always tried to strangle them, you know, as best they can, you know, kill off resources, you know, starve them out if necessary. You know, just does not give them the opportunity to live. You know, they're always trying to fight to defend themselves once they're discovered. So, you know, like I said, it's fascinating, but like I said, ultimately we have to determine or find some sort of location that we can defend, feed, and also, you know, create a future for generations of Africans to come. I mean, we need to do that. But you know, we need to find it to make it seem practical. And if it needs to start from everyday living as a beginning, and then evolve into something that's greater, you know, then that should be the path. But I just think that the whole idea of maroonish is great because we're breaking away from what we know culturally, and that's been European domination.
Right.
And we're trying to create a new philosophical outlook with life in everything that we do. You see, and then move forward with protecting ourselves moving forward, because if we're surrounded, it's difficult to fight, but we will fight. You know, but it's very difficult when you got all enemies around you, looking at any opportunity to try to destroy what you're doing.
Without a doubt.
That's my take on it.
So I appreciate that, because one of the things that comes to mind is a book, a novel by a brother named Vic Reed. It's really hard to come by. It was written back in the 70s, but it's called Nanny Town. And it's a, you know, fictional account of Nanny in the Maroons in Jamaica. And one of the aspects that really always stuck out to me was throughout like half the book, you hear them talking about the slingshot town. They say, oh yeah, no, well, this is the slingshot town. And it's like, yo, what? And they don't really explain what it is until about halfway through. So the book is told, the narrator is like a griot, and he is telling about his youth as a sort of sentinel. So he was scouting the perimeter, and the scouts discover that, you know, the British have found where they are and they're coming to attack them. So what they do is, and this is a bit of a different thing when we talk about lands or the importance of land or the centrality of lands, is that they move all of the people to another location, as in they've got another village already set up somewhere else that they move everybody else. And then they turn the town that they were previously in into a slingshot. In other words, they turn the entire place into a weapon. What they do is all the warriors come, they cut a hole in the back of the huts, they get in there, they have a big cauldron in the middle of the town circle, because y'all know the way they talked about Queen Nanny was what they say about her, that she caught bullets in her butt and that she ate her victims. So they put this big boiling cauldron in the center to sort of play up play to the stereotype of the European. And when the Europeans get close enough, they take arrows, they blast them into the cauldron explodes, and all of the warriors dip out the back of the huts to the other place. They kill all the Europeans, right? That was a slingshot town that they were able to turn into a weapon the very place that they were living. And that always stuck out to me because, I'm a son of Malcolm, right? The basis of any revolution is land. Land has always been important traditionally it's been important to African people. It's where our ancestors are buried, so on and so forth. That is your connection to the land as well as your connection to forever. However, the mandates and dictates of our situation have been as such that we can't be tied to the land in the same way that we previously had been. So what becomes more important is the people that you're associated with and not the land. So I say this because, one, we know that Maroonage has been amorphous. It's taken on whatever shape that its environment determines. So in a place like Jamaica, Maroonage happened up in the hills. In a place like Virginia or North Carolina, the Dismal Swamp, they stayed into the swamp. In fact, there's a book by an archaeologist called Daniel Sayers. It's Legacy of something people. Daniel Sayers is who wrote it. And he's like a Marxist archaeologist. It's kind of hard to get through, but the idea is this man went out with a whole crew into the Dismal Swamp and was able to find artifacts from the Maroons who lived there. And this is a book that came out a few years ago, so it's a relatively recent study. But the idea now becomes that this amorphousness means what's important is not so much that the land itself, but the people who you're doing it with. So I mentioned earlier that in a place like Suriname, they retreated so far south that they were, bordering Brazil. In a place like Jamaica, which is remarkably similar in terms of topography is remarkably similar to Ghana. And it makes sense that if these are Akan people who are taken from, the Coromantee people, they're being taken and thrown across the ocean and they're showing up to a place. Well, most evidence suggests that the vast majority of Maroons were people who had spent little to no time on the plantation. They hit the ground, and in the words of Baba Malcolm, any place was better than here. They ran off into the bush, right? Eventually, as time went on and these communities would become more established, there had to be some sort of protocol for welcoming or not new members. So that's when you get into stories of, they would raid the plantation for people. They would go and take people so they can sort of perpetuate their communities. Or you have instances where there's a period of basically indentured servitude, right? That you come from the plantation. The idea is you have a virus, and before you can come into our village, you need to be cleansed of that virus. You're in a probationary period before you can really come in, because we know all of that. But again, the centrality of this was the community. It was the people. It wasn't necessarily the lands. Now, in today's society, the land's definitely going to be a struggle. You can go on Google Map and look at almost any square inch of the entire world, right? That's going to be a little bit more difficult. But what I think our focus should be on the community. What type of people are we building with? How are we building, and how are we doing that? Now, I don't personally see this Zoom stuff has been whack to me. I'd much rather be with people, talking to people. That's the African way, right? The sociality of it. But what are some of the ways that we can really emphasize this community, that we can focus on building with each other, and determining who is a part of that community and who isn't? So
I have a response to your question.
Yes, ma'am.
So Baba Morris, I think, was asking for specific examples. And I think one of the things that comes to me immediately, of course, Kamali is a great example, but I think, looking at it in terms of legacy and the story of Nana Comer, I think one of the things that we're not acknowledging is that this is a war that is over time and over generations. And I think for me, you know, when I think about that legacy, that he led his people to their legacy, your original question was about like the ways of death. And I think in some ways that is thinking about, I don't know, some white police killing someone. But I do think that death is a part of this, and that in warfare, people have to die. And a part of the reason why folks are not willing to truly like engage in this link you're saying as Maroons is because they're not willing to really go into warfare. And so, you know, I see that there is death that's a part of this, right? But it's death on our terms, right? I'm dying fighting for this so that I can set something up for the next generation, not because I'm dying because I'm sitting passively back waiting for this or trying to ask for permission to be a part of this white society. And I think there is a difference in those relationships to death.
Very well put, huh? Baba Tashango, we got another one. Ready for war.
Yeah, Bo.
I think.
Sorry, the other thing I would say is the reason why I'm thinking about that is because in the definition around resistance as science, I'm thinking about military science, the art of this, right? And so people weren't just like passively walking away. Like you have to have the skills of warfare to do this kind of work. And it's not us singing Kumbaya together. Like that's not how it happens.
You know, when Brother Morris mentioned the movie Quilombo, which historically is largely inaccurate, and it really comes from a place where you know, in order to sort of get the okay from, you know, the higher ups or the gatekeepers in Brazil, they had to give that story of ultimately you know, the Zumbi was painted as irrational, right? Ganga Zumba, who had his white lover, was ultimately in his ear trying to be the voice of reason, but Zumbi was just so, you know, irrational and whatever. But in that movie, there's a scene that to me is just so powerful. It's so powerful, and it involves Zumbi's mother. Now, sometimes she's referred to as his mother, Dandara, or sometimes they say that Dandara was his wife. But in this particular scene, it shows you a forest classroom, and the elder is sitting there and he's teaching them Yoruba, and they say this and this and how do you say this and blah blah blah. And well, the Europeans show up and they come out and they shoot Dandara. And the scene that was always so powerful was all the children run to her fallen body, and then they disperse and go off into war, and they eventually chase them out and beat them, right? But the thing that was always so powerful was, one, it was like, all right, you're really getting a sense of like, how do you teach in a context of war? Well, it's very loving and affectionate. That old man, you know, had a Zumbi who was then his grandson sitting on his lap and all of that. You know, and they were just talking, and they were getting along. And then that idea that then they say, okay, but we have to mourn this woman, but we also have business to handle. And they run off and they go do what it is that they had to do, right? But the balance of this context of war while still building something else, you know, Baba Tashango's big on Amilcar Cabral, but that was the idea of the liberated territory. Yo, we're fighting a revolution. Well, what type of people? And I mean, even if we look historically, right? What type of soldiers make for good national leaders? I mean, you know, there's a lot I think that Fidel did well, but there's also some issues, right? But the idea here was that the idea here was that we are training for life after the revolution. So if we liberate this block, we live on this block now, today, and henceforth, as if we've already won the revolution. And then when we expand, right, 3 blocks out, and that way, by the time we get everything, we're already living what it's like to be free. We've already have practice in freedom. It's not like we wake up tomorrow like, yo, what do we do, right? We're free now. So I think that that's a very important question, Mama Grace. I mean, remembering the context of war, and how that's going to shape how we go about sort of moving forward.
I think, brother, and I'm gonna go on this here. I got somewhere else to be. You use an excellent example, which is Amil Cabral. I like to say he's an intellectual mentor of mine,
Right.
for the most part. And she's absolutely correct. I'm kind of thinking along the lines she's thinking. Maroonage is really an act of war. So what you explained as well in terms of us trying to build liberated territory as we go along is, I think, the strategy. We should have that in mind, that we just, the idea of a nation does not just come to us when we just wake up.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that we have to incorporate in our lives, practically. So I think that in order for it to make sense for a lot of people out here, understanding what Maroonage is and how you can apply it in your daily life is very important as we evolve into getting, I believe, the nation that we all desire. The larger Maroonage, the nation. And I think looking at the past successes with Maroons, it gives us like a symbol or an example to follow, and then we can kind of modernize it. Does that make sense?
Yep. It makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so that's just my take on it. So everything that was just shared I think it's in the right direction, but in those books, I explored all those books, with the exception of Black Marxism. I know I'm aware of it, but everything else I've actually read.
Yeah.
So, so like I said, you're going on the right path. Just that we have to make the idea of Maroonage seem modern and more practical to the average day African, because that history that history really is not known to a lot of Africans at all. Right. A lot of Africans believe that we were just simply accepting that whip. That's it, and there was no attempt to leave, and establish, small societies of our own. So and that's history that should be known. But not only that, we should understand or try to get principles out of those societies that existed in these different places.
Definitely.
That's all I have to share.
Well, I appreciate your question. So these are some of the books that I think are a good place to really, more than just start, but to really go in. Black Marxism, Slavery's Exiles. These are books I've mentioned. Flight to Freedom by Alvin Thompson. That takes on more of an African-centered perspective. Nanny Town is the novel I was referring to. So Clovis Morta, this book, unfortunately, is not in English. Resistência à Escravidão, Resistance to Slavery, Quilombos, right? Clovis Morta was a Brazilian sociologist who really did some theorizing around Maroonage that I think could be beneficial to a lot of us, because unfortunately, if it's not available in English, we don't know about it. But considering the very rich history of Maroonage in Brazil, he's able to draw on a different experiential body as well as a body of literature that can really benefit us. And he focuses a lot on the process, and I've alluded to it here, but the process of Maroonage. So not only the end result, which would be a Maroon community, a society, but that process of disengaging, that process of taking flight, and then that process of re-engaging. And then Maroon Societies, who I've mentioned a few times, what I do like about this book, it's an edited volume, so you'll get to see, he covers all of the Americas. He covers, all the Americas. And you kind of get to see how Maroonage played itself out. And here's one of the things that I want to point out about why, again, establishing Maroonage as an African cultural tradition. They say Africa's a big continent. Oh, you have so many different languages. You have so many this, that, and the third. But the idea becomes that how is it that Africans taken from all over the continent at different points, right, over the course of hundreds of years, responded to their condition in the same way, right? That to me speaks to a deeper structure, a cultural structure, or cultural infrastructure that really could serve us. And that's really what this take on Maroonage is and what it's all about. And the last thing I want to say is that, I appreciate Brother Morris for pushing the practical aspect of it. And one of the things that I really think about a practical aspect of Maroonage is that a lot of times it's more in our face than we would acknowledge. So one of the things I was talking about recently was a jazz club in Chicago, or the emergence of underground parties, or underground media, or underground, right? All of these sort of things that African people have done in order to, again, because I'm trying to shift away from the emphasis on land and more in emphasis on community. My definition of Maroonage includes the pursuit and maintenance of an autonomous community. The land, for now, can go until like Nana Comer, we can find a place that it is that we need to be, and that we can do what it is we need that we need to do. The community is always going to be the main focus. Is if you my people, you my people. And guess what, man? As we say, skin folk ain't always kinfolk. So we got to know who are ours and rock for them. So if there are any final questions or any comments? All right, well, listen, there you go. My contact, amarirebel@gmail.com. Any questions, comments, concerns, any information, articles, book suggestions, or if you want some of my book suggestions, please feel free to hit me up. Other than that, y'all have a blacknificent day, and we're only getting started. We got 2 more days of this, so I'm really looking forward to what else people are offering. Thank y'all for spending this time with me.
Thank you, my brother.
Good. Oh man.
How we doing? We all set?
Yeah, we good to go. I'm just now seeing all these comments, man.
I don't see no comments.
Yeah, in the chat box, which I couldn't see because my screen was sharing, but now it was, I mean, we pretty much hit on, but this sister had asked a question.
What about that one that says the difference between sovereignty and Maroonage? That's a good question.
That's the one that I'm saying. I wish I would have seen that. But it doesn't look like she's still here. I hear most people speak about sovereignty, yeah. But you know what the difference is, Tashango.
I mean, I think it's a great question, man, because there are people who who believe in Maroonage who don't believe in sovereignty.
Yeah, I agree. Well, all right. So look, I'm glad we're here because this
Still recording, by me.
Say it again.
I'll just give you a heads up. It's still recording.
Oh yeah, no. It's all good. I appreciate this. Even the very concept of sovereignty as we understand it, right? The sovereignty of nations and all of that sort of thing. I don't think that that's an effective model. You feel me? But I also know that, so here we go, right? So people will say Cujo was a sellout because he signed a treaty with the Jamaicans. I mean, with the British, right, on the island of Jamaica. That was a way for him to secure his position, though, right? That ultimately he was trying to secure the survival of his people. They were still, and as we see, right, the encroachment on Maroon lands, the taxation of Maroons, things like that are happening. That wasn't the securing of sovereignty. They were still autonomous, right? They were able to operate independently, but ultimately they did not have complete control of their situation. Now, I don't know if that's the best example, but what I do think that there is the difference between sovereignty and autonomy would be an example like the United States can operate in a way that is sovereign. They can make the decisions that ultimately affect the ability of other people to be dependent or independent, right? What's that documentary? Life or Debt? Life of Debt? What is it? Life or Debt? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, Life and Debt.
Life and Debt.
Yeah. Jamaica. I remember that one.
IMF and all of that. How those nations, they may be autonomous in the sense that they can make decisions, but ultimately they are not sovereign, because when those institutions say we're calling in our debt, or things like that, that what's happening is that autonomy is being undermined. You feel what I'm saying? Tashanka, you feel me?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. But yeah, man, I would like to see. What's this guy? Dog bite it. What's this man's name? I can't think of his name. It's a black book with white writing. He's from Newark, New Jersey, and he has a book on this concept of sovereignty, but really, like, saying sovereignty is not necessarily
Oh, I know who you're talking about too.
is his name as some man, it's some, yeah, he got another book on the Stoner Rebellion that I got as well. Anyway, yeah, bro, but we can rap about this stuff. Brother Hassan, I think we good to go, man. Thank you so much for your help.
You talking about sovereign evolution, man?
That's it. Sovereign evolution. Yep.
Hey, I got a question, man. I think I probably asked you this in person before, but you think the Cromanti, when they were on the boats, man, did they see themselves as prisoners of war, or did they ever see themselves as being enslaved? Like enslaved people, because there's a different mentality that comes with that, man.
I feel you. That's really interesting, man, because they were a warrior people. You know what, though? I didn't say this, but the Coromantee defeated the Ashanti and had a rivalry that lasted all the way till the 1990s, yo. So there was that part of that hill. There's a hill, I call it Death Hill or something like that. That on the back, it's a flat drop off, and the Ashanti were raiding the coast, just taking Africans and selling them to Europeans. So when they get to Coromantee, what they did was they chased them up. They lured them up to this hill, and they cut a sharp corner, and all the Ashanti went and fell down this pit. So while I was there, they're like, "Yo, those banana trees down there." They said if you took a knife and cut it, blood would come from the trunk of those trees, right? So anyways, the point is that they were very much a warrior people. I have not been able to possibly wrap my mind around what it must have been like to have been taken and thrown into those ships, right? And all of that sort of thing. But I agree with you. If they saw themselves as prisoners of war, then that would have certainly been a different mindset, a different orientation, and how they went about doing what they did. You know what I mean? Have you ever read the book of Negroes?
Nah, I watched the movie.
No. Don't. Oh, you went to audiobooks. Listen to the book, because the sister who reads it is very good. But in the movie, I'm told, there's nothing like the book. But I have not come across any piece of writing that has captured the experience of capture like he does. Is a woman who narrates, but it's a man who wrote it. Man, listen to that book. It's a long one, like what's it, Standing at the Scratch Line. It's a long one like that, but it's an amazing book to me. And like I said, it's the best thing to capture that process.
Yo, I got two more questions if somebody else ain't asking.
Yes, sir.
Yo, so my two questions are, one is, I remember a story about the Cromanti killing Nana Ose Tutu down by the river.
Oh,
have you ever heard this? And then
heard that? Nope.
The Ashanti captured that Cromanti and sold them wholesale.
Interesting.
British, and that's why they were able to cause such much ruckus in Jamaica, because in the boat going over.
There was a wow, that's crazy. That's crazy. There was another story, which I guess would, you know what, that actually would probably be in line with that, was that they say that the origin of the name Coromantee came from, all right, let me think about this. All right, you know what Asante means. Asante means because of war, Asante, right? And I guess if you did, because I certainly do not speak any kind of language, but Coromantee, if you take that S out or whatever, then it would be anti, again, war. So there was a story of somebody was telling that there was a fight between the Ashanti and the Fanti, and the Ashanti won, and they named then the battle took place in what is now Coromantee. And the translation is, I stand with the warriors. Now, the reason that one didn't make sense to me is because Coromantee people are Fanti. So why, unless they just submitted to the name, but that kind of undermines, you know, the rest of the things that we were talking about. But the story that I shared with you was the story that I got from the, you know, the chief of Coromantee, as to how he's telling his story. But yeah, man.
So my second and last question, I'm burning you up over here, but yo, in studying, going all the way back to ancient, you know, Carthage and Numidia with Hannibal Barca.
Yep.
They had a group of people, the Garamanti, who were in northern Africa, like probably not too far from Nubia.
Wow.
So I was wondering if there was, and I think HRO might have put this idea in my head, but that they migrated from the east during the, you know, the Arab invasions, and that they migrated across. And I didn't know if there was a connection between the Garamanti and the Coromantee, but I could see why they're not connected. But you know, just a thought. I was thinking.
Yo, I'll certainly look into it, man. There's a guy by the name of Kofi Agorsa, Agorsah, who's an archaeologist, Ghanaian archaeologist. So he's done like some archaeological work on Coromantee. But yeah, man, that place is I'm gonna look into it. You said Garamanti.
Yeah.
I'm gonna check that out, man.
They were warriors too, so definitely a warrior tribe. But I guess what I learned from here and I've heard before is that Coromantee, though, the British come in and they kind of bastardize every single word.
Exactly. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to figure out the connections between
what it is exactly, man. But yeah, man, I think Brother Hassan, it looks like we're good to go. Garamanti, got it. Brother Hassan?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think we're good to go, man. Baba Tashango has asked all his questions.
All right.
So much, man.
I guess I'll let them know that we're all set here. And I guess I'll see y'all at the next round.
Man, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
All right, then.
Intro to O. And my dude, that Timbuktu to Ave. Renew your passion, shun the condition, and not the who, what, when, where, and you are from. At last. Put the higher in hierarchy. Climber, paint a picture, no crime, reppin' Garvey, and all that's godly. Sorry, I can't relate, I'm warrior Masi. Zulu pull up on Fasi and catch a body. Enemies near and far declaring.